Hey, man, it's John Benjamin from Colin. How are you?
Hey, John. What's up?
How you doing?
Good. I'm doing my show right now, incidentally.
No, I know. I just figured I would call just because, I want to address this. I talked to Tim last night, and
Tim?
I just wanted to go to... No, Tim Pool.
Okay.
Regarding the stuff he was talking about regarding Bob's Burgers, and I'm obviously Bob on Bob's Burgers, so when I talk to Tim about it, I usually don't want to get in the middle of shit like this. And I certainly don't want to, deal with this publicly. I probably could have called you earlier. I just figured I would.
Wait.
I have free time now, and then I'm back, obviously, to recording Bob's Burgers, because that's what I do all the time.
Wait. What are you...
I understand. Well, let me finish. This is kind of what Tim was talking about. How you filibuster and cut people off. But when you talk to Tim about the problems you were having with Bob's Burgers, of course Tim was going to talk to me about it.
Wait, what? What are you talking about? There's a what?
About how you were upset about your diminished role in the show, and how Tim had pointed that out, rightfully so, because he was just, telling it like it is, like he does.
This is, so we're going to have to play that whole thing sometime, but that's just something that I think made everybody here laugh, because the premise of the bit is, H. Jon Benjamin getting upset that Sam doesn't know as much about philosophy as Tim Pool, and telling him that that's why he doesn't have as many lines. That's why he doesn't have more lines on Bob's Burgers. I think at one point he interrogates him about whether he's read Nagel or Scanlon. So there is some context there. We're going to do a fuller version of that at some point in the near future. But as a given my interest and as a Bob's Burgers fan, I enjoyed that. But in any case, I am Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, as always, by our super producer, Jake Appett, our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World, and, not as always, but as always, and as always delightfully when it happens, by RM Brown.
Thank you for having me.
Always, man. So, so I wanted I wanted to start with that bit about how Tim Pool was upset that, not that Tim Pool was upset that, Tim Pool, the premise was telling H. Jon Benjamin in their routine phone calls that about Sam complaining to him about not having more lines on Bob's Burgers because Tim Pool had actually said on air, this is the basis of the bit, that Sam's, when I talked to Sam Cedar, 2 years ago or whatever, he was telling me, that he was very upset that he didn't have more lines on Bob's Burgers, which is kind of him interpreting his interpreting shtick, right, about like why this very minor character he voices isn't a bigger deal on the show as being a real thing. And merging that together with Tim saying that Sam Cedar doesn't understand the difference between deontology and utilitarianism, and that's a big problem. But I wanted to talk, so that in that debate, if people remember that, Tim Pool, when he started using those terms, deontology and consequentialism, and Sam was like, I don't really know what you mean. And he was like, oh my God, you don't know what I mean? And in order to explain it, right, this is philosophy instructors, take note, this is how you do it. He said that being a consequentialist is like being like Thanos from the Avengers, and being willing to wipe out half of the human race for the sake of preventing starvation. So that's like one end of the spectrum of debates that you can do. We are going to be playing a little bit later on the episode something that I think is on the other end of the spec. Well, maybe not quite all the way on the other end, but certainly a hell of a lot better than that. That's a debate that I did a couple weeks ago at Texas Tech University Law School with Jon Miltimore from the Foundation for Economic Education, which is a libertarian think tank. So we're gonna play that for you guys in a few minutes. Anna Kasparian is going to be joining us for the last part of the show and going into the post game. She also did a debate of sorts recently with Ben Shapiro, friend of the show, and so we're going to watch I think some highlights, some highlights from that. But before any of that, I want to go to somebody whose understanding of ethics. Well, actually, sorry. I want to make sure before I set this up that we actually have the clip, because there was
Yeah, which clip is it? I'll fall on the sword if
okay,
we don't have it.
I could do the Jimmy Dore thing and
and
blame the producer for
yeah.
Good stuff. So do we have Alex Jones on eating babies?
Oh yeah, we just got to do it as a.
Wait, this guy? Are you talking about this guy? Oh, damn it! Here we go.
I may just never come back.
That guy?
I may just never come back.
Can you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
I hear he may never come back.
I may just never come back.
We have a we have a flawless show today. Yeah, I have it. For some reason, it's on Rumble, which really interesting website I've never been on, but it doesn't allow you to directly take their videos. So I'm going to do a share of this. Jesus Christ.
And to give up.
That's just how all InfoWars videos start.
I saw this clip this morning and I thought surely it's out of context, and it's not. I have the transcript here where he says, why don't we just start eating babies? We've got all this extra baby parts, millions we kill every year. Why don't we just eat them? So that's the next evolution, and you will eat the bugs as you will eat the dead babies. The example I often use is, if we want to get to ethical bedrock, we should be able to say things like, why can't we eat babies? There are sometimes extra babies in the world. They're full of protein. Can't we eat them? It's not a conversation about eating babies. It's a conversation about how you can close the door to this idea that we both recognize as repellent, and, well, we recognize that it's the way. There are people out there who will say, hey, Sam Harris is a guy who wonders, can we eat babies? But isn't that what this whole system is? It's a system where we don't value others around us. We don't value ourselves, and we don't stand up for others. Nobody stands up for us. And then we're isolated, atomized, alone individuals that this predatory system can have its way with. And that's what the New World Order is setting up. Here's a short clip of a Sam Harris on the Young Turds talking about eating the babies.
You know, why can't we eat babies? What's wrong with eating babies? If we've got extra babies around that nobody wants, why can't we eat?
And then he goes on, as I read you the full quote.
It's amazing.
Extra babies. Remember when I said on Joe Rogan like 4 years ago? The governor of Virginia at the time said, we gonna get rid of the baby after they born. And I made the satirical line that, why we wasting 7 pounds of meat? But they are using every part of the baby for medical experiments and the medical industry. And when we allow ourselves to be defiled and degraded like that, or made in the image of God, we allow these sick abortionists to do horrible things to the dead and dying babies even after they're out of the womb. We all die inside.
Yeah. There's so many things I like about this clip, which Andy found us earlier today. One of them is, I mean, because there are layers here. There's Sam Harris being asinine, and there's Alex Jones just being like just delightfully over the top, insanely slanderous in how he's presented the already asinine thing that Sam Harris is actually saying. Like man, he did not give us more than 5 seconds of that clip.
Yeah, that's it almost makes me love Alex Jones more to do something like that. It's like if we were having a discussion and I was like, hey, let's say I did 9/11, and he just cut that out. He's like, look at what this guy said. He said he wanted.
He said he did 9/11.
He said it.
I may just never come back.
Man, Ben busting out the Alex Jones impression. Maybe you just got to go real horse, because everyone's impression of Alex Jones is better than I expect. But whenever anyone impersonates Alex Jones, I'm like, that sounds exactly like him. Is he in the room with me? But in that same clip, well, maybe you're about to get to this, Ben, but it seems like he does the same exact thing that Sam Harris does when he harkens back to his joke, where he says, like, why didn't we just use the whole baby, right? Isn't the whole point? Aren't they doing the same thing there?
No,
or are you about to...
pretty much the same thing. Like the context of this, and it's also really funny because it's like, well, here's Sam Harris on the Young Turks, and it's
10
like,
years ago.
Yeah, it's like one, it's like 10 years ago. Two, what he's showing a clip from is a debate, right? I mean, he's there to argue with Jen Cougar, the host, and obviously Alex Jones can't show you any of Jeg's part, because then that might put this like awful lefty in a good light, right? That like is disagreed with Sam Harris and, about this stuff.
Yeah.
And 3, as the quote that he read before he played that hilariously decontextualized clip to make it clear.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm not going to say a lot of nice things about Sam Harris. I'm very critical of the guy, but like, I'll say this much. I don't actually think he advocates eating babies.
If he did, I would listen to his Making Sense podcast. I'll be like, well, what's Sammy up to lately?
Yeah.
How are you going to get yourself out of this one, Sammy?
Well, this goes far back. I mean, he's just in the, the philosophical tradition of Jonathan Swift, right? With the Modest Proposal, which was a sincere demand that we should eat babies, right? So it's an honorable lineage.
Yeah, I mean, Yanos,
yeah, exactly.
in the chat says, was Harris attempting some Swiftian thing, or was he doing one of his classic capital T, capital E thought experiments?
That's the phrase I was looking for, thought experiment. He was doing a thought experiment.
And
yeah, exactly.
And that's exactly the thing. I mean, it's like he's sort of trying to do both. Like the context, I mean, look, it's been a long time since I've watched the original, but I'm 99% sure that the actual context here is they're arguing about Islam, and and Jeg's an atheist, but he's not, Islam is incredibly dangerous guy, like Sam Harris certainly, spent the war on terror years being, and presumably still is. And probably Jeg brought up the infamous nuclear thought experiment from the end of Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith, where where Harris makes this bizarre, like he says, he is willing to embrace the Thanos position more or less, that kind of extreme utilitarianism. He says, well, if a country that was run by religious fanatics got a hold of, he doesn't say Iran, but it kind of seems like he means Iran, got a hold of nukes, then it might be justified to do a first strike to against that country to stop from using them. Insane, evil thing to say. Harris's defense against this, like against people being mad about it, is to do what PZ Myers calls the Harris shuffle, where he's like, well, see, you're taking me out of context. There's a actually, this is misrepresenting me, whatever, which is hilarious because like he also over the weekend he finally responded to Nathan Robinson's like long article about him by saying, well, Nathan's clearly just crazy because he's writing such a long article devoted to him. He must just be obsessed. And it's like, okay, well, if you spend the 10,000 words to actually break down everything that you exactly said, then you're just crazy, right? But otherwise, you're misrepresenting him. That's the game. That's the Harris shuffle. So he's doing that, and so Harris is saying about that, about some of the positions he took in those heady post 9/11 years about torture and profiling. That you're misunderstanding me. I'm not really, if you're this mad at what I said, I must not have meant it. And what I actually, all I'm really doing is, he said, I'm displaying a philosopher's love of edge cases. We need to be able to consider extreme examples to as thought experiments.
I found that works in relationships too, where you just say like, honey, if that's what you think I said and you're that upset, there's no way I said it, right? And then they usually understand. It was a thought experiment. That usually works.
You just surround her with gaslit. And,
So Sam is basically gaslighting an entire audience. Yeah. Kind of subtle. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah.
And it's like, the thing is, like, this is not all what thought experiment means, right? If you read like Michael Brooks's book Against the Web, he's got this long Harris chapter on there. I don't remember the version of it that actually made it into the chapter, but I remember the when he was working on the chapter, helping up with the book, the verbal version of the point that was like a lot crasser than the one that made it into the book was something like, it's like, look, this is like if I said, hey, I might have to kill you and bang your wife, and said like, hey, no, don't get upset. It's just a thought experiment. It's like, I'm just saying this is a thing I might have to do. Like, it's like, no, that's literally not what a thought experiment means, right? A thought experiment, it's like you're talking about a hypothetical situation you don't actually expect to come up. It's supposed to prove something one way or the other about some general principle. That would be an example of a thought experiment, right? This isn't a thought experiment. This is just advocating something that you later get embarrassed about advocating. So Harris is being ridiculous here, but his attempt at damage control when he's talking to Jeg is to say yeah. Fair enough. His attempt when he's talking to Jeg, his attempt at damage control is to say, well, look, I mean, I could just be making a point, and he's sort of mangling his thought experiment defense and mashing it together with Jonathan Swift's modest proposal. Like, I think that's what's actually going on in that clip. So it's like Harris is being ridiculous, but also just the brazenness of clipping like 2.5 seconds of that and said, see, he said he wants to eat babies. New World Order.
Oh my God.
Again, accurate. It reminds me of the Sartre quote. It's I think people quote it a lot these days, but how, anti-Semites they're completely aware of the absurdity of their replies. They know their remarks are frivolous, but they are amusing themselves for as their adversary who's obliged to use words responsibly. I feel like he was 100% amusing himself. I don't believe that he believed that in a second. I believe it was like that fascist tendency of just, we can just say whatever the fuck we want. Because it's delighting in bad faith. I feel like.
Absolutely.
He knows.
Did y'all read any of the leaked text messages from Alex Jones?
A little bit.
Oh my God. I mean, it's like a lot of that stuff is obvious confirmation that he's, obviously whatever, that he's all, it's all an act and all that stuff. But his personal life is fascinating. Like it's a layup for like a Netflix special or whatever. But like, there's one part where it's talking about how he got pulled over by the cops for drunk driving, and he told the cops that like something like he drank a whole bottle of sake, but he didn't want to walk home or something like that. It's just like nonstop stuff like that. Like his personal life is hilarious. Like he's just in the suburbs of Austin, Texas, like acting like a lunatic nonstop. It's hilarious.
Nice.
Yeah.
We need this. We need the series on him and the Tim Pool compound as well.
Yes.
We gotta put something together on that. But I heard it's such a treasure trove that like it's like 6 hours of content from one of the ex compound members. That
It's just the most amazing dude to have a compound.
Yeah, he's definitely like he's a funny little sort of like small business tyrant example of what happens when somebody who's like totally immature like gets financial power over people. You know what I mean? Like it's just like it's so, and you could see it like in the when he does like his live show, you could just see it that he marches around. Hey, you shut up, you know, like he's the king of the castle over there. It's so obnoxious. It's so obnoxious. It's like his attitude in general is to me like an example of why people shouldn't have that kind of financial power over other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. So this is as good a lead in as any to thinking about people having financial power over other people, to an interaction that I had today with Gene Epstein. You guys know who this is?
Yeah, he does debates and stuff, right? He's always like a pro capitalist guy.
Yeah, exactly. He's a very adamantly pro-capitalist guy. I remember, Michael Brooks once speculating on air that there's a some psychodrama going on here because Gene's mom was actually a member of the Communist Party back when.
Whoa!
But I personally wouldn't say anything like that. I'll just refer back to it. But in any case, I debated this guy almost 2 years ago in like the weirdest place I've ever been to do a debate, which was the Villages in Florida.
Oh, no way! That's right. I remember. I listened to that debate. I remember that. What was the average age of the audience member in that crowd?
Average age of the audience was a lot younger than you'd think.
Really? Okay.
Because I think a lot of people didn't actually live there. Like I think some of them did, for sure, right?
Okay.
But like I think there were people who were like coming in from Orlando and stuff.
Where are the Villages again? I'm
I'm
from Florida. I'm curious. No, I'm just thinking if capitalism has done right by anyone, it might be the people living in the Villages.
Yeah,
that's not like not the best terrain. Yeah,
exactly. And they all have like it was. I spent a very weird weekend there. Leading up to the debate. I like in this hotel in the Villages, and like there are like golf carts everywhere because that's like a major form of transportation there. So like you see like golf carts parked outside of restaurants all the time and stuff. It's the weirdest thing.
It's amazing.
But so this is all happening just like April 2021, which I can remember pretty exactly because there was a long back and forth about whether the debate was even going to happen or when it was going to happen, because basically because this is April 2021, and like I got look, I'm unashamed of letting the of letting the New World Order. I couldn't do it that time. Vax me. But I got my jab the second I could, but like it was still the debate was like it was like not quite 10 days after I got my second shot. So there was like a whole back and forth about that. Gene, I guess lives his principles and didn't give a shit. He's like, it's fine. But
he's an older guy too, right? It's a little risky move
for him, honestly, which I actually told him in the emails leading up to it. But and this in the course of it, and so today, he was, well, actually originally yesterday, like he likes to do these things where he sort of like, randomly responds to people, to like leftists on Twitter, and like I think more often than not, nothing comes of it, but he does it a fair amount. And like once out of every 10 or 20 times, I'll respond to him doing that. And so we had one of those over the weekend. It was about student loan debt and forgive. Well, really, it was about tuition-free higher education, right? The Bernie Sanders proposal. And he was like, well, should it apply to people who get like PhDs in medieval history? And I was like, yeah, man, of course. Right? Like that's if I mean, like what kind of principle is that they like, college should be free, but not if it's like something silly. Right?
not if it's something I don't like.
No, economists should have to pay their loans back, but nobody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that was his next one. What about people getting MBAs? I was like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like, yeah, just I don't think that public universities should charge tuition. Full stop. I don't really care what you're studying. And so we went back and forth about this for a while. Why he thought, I don't know, like to him, these were like, oh God. All right. Sorry. I think I was lost for a second, but now I'm found. So, everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So we went back and forth about this for a little while. And then, today, after some more back and forth about it, he brings up this debate that we had in 2021. So, he says, when I debated at Ben Burgis, he admitted he'd be prepared to jail, albeit reluctantly and hesitantly, those choosing a conventional firm over worker-owned, an authoritarian streak that I hope is not shared by other socialist tags, Bhaskar, Sankara, and Professor Wolf.
Oh, he's dragging them into it.
I know, right?
Unbelievable. He's snitch tagging.
He's snitch tagging. Look what Ben said, guys. Don't be friends with him anymore.
Yeah, well, you'll be amazed to know that this isn't exactly what I said. But
what?
I mean, the back and forth there was the back and forth of it was that in the debate, right? It was about capitalism and socialism, which I have to say I spent talking about capitalism and socialism. Okay. So I have to say I spent this debate talking about capitalism and socialism and why I thought socialism, would be better. And he mostly spent saying, well, if you want workers' control over the means of production, you should just try to start worker co-ops and hope that you can, outcompete Amazon or whatever. And if you don't do this, then you're a hypocrite and you don't have the courage of your convictions, none of which has anything to do with the debate topic, right? It's about capitalism and socialism. But in the course of it, he said, oh, so you want to use the iron fist of the state. I remember that was a phrase he used to force businesses to be organized the way that you want them, you want them to be, right? To be worker owned. And at a point, I was like, yeah, here are some policies I think we could do that would that would help shift us over to an economy that was dominated by that. I was like, okay, but like when you mandate it, or mandate it for firms over a certain size or whatever, it's like, yeah, I could see circumstances under which I'd support that. And he said, well, oh, so you're saying people should go to jail, for not going along with this. And I pointed out that labor laws are typically not enforced by jail as a first resort, right? You get a fine maybe.
I think Howard Schultz would be in jail many times over if that's how they were actually enforced. So
100%, yeah. I mean,
Howard Schultz would be serving his 200 consecutive life sentences for many NLRB violations that he's been busted for. Yeah, it's just typically not how it works. I mean, like, I suppose theoretically, if like a regulatory agency finds you and then you just like doggedly don't pay the fine, then like, 20 steps down the road, you could actually get to a situation, where you were doing time. But you could say the same thing about traffic tickets or noise violations. That's just doesn't seem that, interesting to me.
Yeah.
So,
but they hate those too, and they hate those too, right? Or they don't believe you need a driver's license. I don't know about this guy though.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, famously at that Libertarian Party convention in 2016, not Gary Johnson, who's the one they ultimately nominated, but the rest of the candidates were like, no, you shouldn't need driver's licenses to drive a car. What's next? Do I need the government's permission to make toast in my own damn toaster? That was a example.
Oh, I love that guy.
Yes,
I love that guy.
Didn't he strip naked during that debate?
If so, that's not the clip I saw.
Okay.
Maybe we can do a Thursday night debate breakdown sometime and see if that happened. So Bhaskar, having been snitch tagged, responds. That's having some technical problems. So Jake, you want to pull it up? That's Epstein tweet 2. Says, if the property laws of democratic socialist government say that firms not cooperatively owned employ wage labor should be liable to fines and prosecution, why wouldn't there be punishment? If you violate OSHA laws, there's punishment too. Is that authoritarianism? All right. Now, does anybody want to guess if Gene ever directly responds to that question?
I would have to say probably not.
Yeah, he does not. This, I believe, is as close as he gets to directly answering it. He says, sorry to hear this. Whether or not you support OSHA, one can at least make the case that it's intended to prevent physical harm, which is, notice, by the way, that nothing in that sentence says like what he actually thinks about it.
Right.
Whether or not you support OSHA, one can at least make the case that's intended to prevent physical harm. Does Bhaskar really believe I'm harming him if I work for a firm structured like Google? Will he also jail me for harm done by pro-capitalist tweets?
I think yes. I think we should jail him, actually, just for fun. I don't know. See what happens.
What these guys don't know is that the jails in Ben Burgis's model society are going to be so nice. Like they're going to be. I just know Ben would do those luxury.
They're like, no, Ben would definitely do Norwegian jails where it's like, holy shit, this is way nicer than my apartment.
It's basically the Villages. Is what Ben's jail is.
Ben's jail has golf carts, shuffleboard.
It's just the Villages, but if you try to stray beyond the boundary, there's that giant bubble for the prisoner.
Yes, absolutely. The dome, Stephen King's dome.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, you have to spend 6 weeks in that, if you don't pay your fine.
Yes.
Yeah. So at this point, I will admit to getting irritated, say, Gene, you know perfectly well it's absurdly bad faith straw man. The analogy would be other laws that protect the direct, literal economic interests of workers, e.g. minimum wage laws or wage laws against union busting, not harm done by speech, which, seems like a pretty straightforward distinction to me. Gene is troubled by it. Says, sorry to hear this from Ben.
It's very fatherly. It's very grandfatherly the way. So, man, I'm really disappointed in Ben.
Imagine him seeing that tweet and just being like, "Oh man, this is such a shame. It's really sad. This ruined my Sunday."
I'm not mad. This is the thing with Ben. I'm not mad at him. I'm disappointed in him.
He can do some. He knows better. He knows better.
Yeah, exactly. He knows. There's so much potential there.
Yeah, exactly. He just knows if I applied myself, I could spend all my time advocating for lower taxes for rich people. If some freely choose to work for a conventionally structured firm like Google, the only harm done to others is via the force of the example. Hence, no different from the sway of speech. If worker ownership is so much better, what does Ben have to fear? so I, pointed out, in response to this, I guess we don't have this one. It's okay. The argument he's making here, you could equally make against minimum wage laws or laws against union busting, right? That it's like, well, look, if it's better to work in a place where you paid over minimum wage, just hold out for one of those jobs. If it's better to work in a place that will, that won't fire everybody who starts to tries to start a union, then just do that. And like the whole dynamic of this exchange is that I really want him to admit that he is also against all that stuff, because he obviously is.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want to say that.
Right.
Because
not a popular position.
Yes, not at all a popular position. So I say, okay, so wouldn't this apply to laws, minimum wage laws, to laws against union busting? And he says, does Ben really need to keep forcing these analogies? To put a finer point on it, I choose to work for a conventional firm like Google for $150,000 per year. Ben no longer needs to get back to me, since I know his reply. He knows. He'd first warn me, but then reluctantly throw me in jail.
Yeah, definitely. You going to jail, buddy.
Yeah. So, pointed out that this is, if they're forced, he should be able to explain to me why, given his libertarian principles, there's a difference between them. He did have 2 years to think about this since that debate at the Villages in 2021. And also, obviously, nobody's like, why is he even talking about the worker? That's not how this works at all, right? I mean, that if there was some law saying like firms over a certain size, have to give work, everybody who works there or has worked there for a certain amount of time, voting rights to elect the committee that runs the firm. It's like, if there was an employer who flouted that law, I mean, like, clearly the employees wouldn't be the ones who'd be fined. Right.
Right.
Like,
Right.
they're, the employer's being fined on their behalf, just like if they're being paid less than minimum wage, just like if they're being fired for trying to start a union. So this whole thing is just very odd. And, kind of the last, we might have to hold. So Andy did find the libertarian striptease. I think that might have to be in the post game. But,
yeah, that's after hours. That's after hours stuff.
Yeah, GTAA After Dark. But the bizarre thing about this to me is like, this is something that in the debate itself was really aggravating, because he wants to use these super libertarian arguments against socialism, but he doesn't want to grapple with the fact that these super libertarian arguments could equally well be used against everything, that makes capitalism a little bit less of a Dickensian nightmare right now. And they could also equally well be used as arguments against, like, look, I mean, if you really want the state to butt out of the economy, I mean, like, what does that look like? Do we even have a modern economy? Which is something that, I did try to push at our debate at the Villages.
Mm-hmm.
Going to show just a minute of that.
Does it really matter at that point? Why would you still be offended by it?
I got you. Thank you. So yes, I think that, first of all, of course, it goes without saying that I don't accept the hypothetical that truly clean capitalism would result in this greater prosperity. In fact, I think in the real life, in numerous ways, every successful market that's ever existed has been propped up by numerous forms of state intervention. That without state-backed currency, without limited liability corporations, without intellectual property protections, all sorts of things that many libertarians object to, I think it's very unlikely that we would have a form of capitalism that was even close to the level of prosperity that we had right now. But even if I did accept the premise, right? So it's an interesting thought experiment. If we had much less poverty, but we still had rampant income inequality, would that still be objectionable? Well, it would certainly be less objectionable, because one of the things that's wrong with income inequality is that it results in the coexistence of great wealth and great poverty, and redistribution could solve a lot of that. But that's not the only thing that's wrong with income inequality. Another thing that's wrong with income inequality is that it makes political equality ludicrously impossible, because concentrations of wealth in every country that's ever existed always lead to concentrations of political power. Sometimes Americans believe we can campaign finance and reform our way out of it. Not going to happen. Concentrated wealth always leads to concentrated political influence. Another thing that's wrong with economic inequality is that it gives some people much more power over others in workplaces. So yes, I have to say, I find extremely unlikely hypothetical that you just gave me, then I would think that would remove one of my objections to income inequality, at least income inequality as extreme as we have. It certainly wouldn't reject. It certainly would remove all of them. And I am very, very curious about how far Gene would actually want to go in removing the state from the economy, and whether he really believes that really removing the state from the economy so we can have some libertarian vision of clean capitalism is going to lead to more prosperity as opposed to realistically quite a bit less.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for the question, Ben. Briefly, again, I don't know. I didn't invite Paul Krugman. I invited you. With respect to that question, it's a big topic. Obviously, I do believe that under crony capitalism, the rich and powerful are supported. You even seem to believe in regulatory capture. You suggested that clearly, if we weaken the state, if we go back to something like the vision of the founding fathers, we'd have much greater justice in this society, because the state is used to protect the powerful. That's the basic nature of the state. You pass laws, you pass regulation, the powerful and the moneyed interest get interested. That, to my mind, is just sort of basic political economy. The only thing I would say, however, in terms of actually relating to the larger question, is that what Ben wants to do is foster a dystopia of greater government power.
You missed the moment of not dropping the mic after you finished. You know, you should just been like
it's just so conspicuously no answer to that question. I mean, like, his answer was like, well, if I wanted to answer that question, I would have invited Paul Krugman, not you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, that's nice. Can you give me a little preview of what you would have said to Paul?
Yeah. He also uses, I remember he's the guy who uses the term crony capitalism a lot, right? Like, we're not under his ideal version of how economics should work, because because there's like some state intervention or whatever, right? But yeah, it would have been nice to hear his answer. Like, what does he think? Because that's my thing with libertarians, is like, it seems like an exhausting form of life on the planet. Like, oh, I got to make sure my food doesn't have poison. I got to like do all the like regulation myself to the point where I cannot live a normal life. You know, like, that seems like to me the reality of the libertarian vision of the world. You know, I mean,
there's my all-time favorite example. People have heard me talk about this before, but is Joran Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute.
Love him.
That yes. He basically, one of the first episodes of the show he was on, he sort of accused me of wanting to take away his television, I think.
And he was doing this in an empty room too, which made it even more absurd.
It's like, I don't even see a TV, man. I think
he loves. I have heard debates with him, and he's very afraid that someone's gonna like take his like TV and his like DVD player and his Roku. Like, that's his main thing, is that he has this crap that he like really loves that somebody's gonna take from him.
I mean, I don't know how much I would be willing to sign a pledge. Committing myself to under no circumstances expropriating your odds Roku.
I'm not signing anything. I want that Roku.
Oh, here's how you can tell that Jake is the actual union organizer on the screen. He's like, what? I'm going to make a concession before we even start negotiating.
Yeah, everything will be under.
Yeah. Is still on the table.
Yeah. He's got some first editions of Atlas Shrugged that we might have to keep
redistribute.
an eye on. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's pretty striking how these people always act like the fact that crony capitalism exists is completely as if it's completely independent from the nature of capitalism itself. Like there's some kind of magic version of capitalism that would exist in which there wasn't this intertwining between the state and big business. I would love to hear what they think that is and how that's going to come about. I mean, and for the record, I think socialists should answer that question too, in the sense of like concentration of power is an issue, right? That you're going to have to deal with, and you're designing your society. But it's like kind of ridiculous. They act like it's just different levers you could turn, like turn up the capitalism, turn down the government. We got an ANCAP fantasy, unless there's something I'm missing here.
Yeah, totally.
I think it's the Scotsmen that they're not true Scotsmen in capitalism. They're just cronies.
Well, because I mean, like, yeah, why is it that you end up with this entwining, right? Like, I mean, essentially, like, this is always the thing that seems crazy to me about it, because it's like, look, if you accept that we're going to have massive inequality of material wealth, the idea that that's not going to find ways of translating itself into massive inequality of political power just seems insane to me. It's like, of course it will, right? Like, it's like you're just going to have like a more virtuous class of rich people who aren't going to try to exercise political influence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like his angle too is like, you know, a lot of people who are like either have a dream of being a small business owner or are small business owners, and they kind of like fancy themselves libertarians. Even for that, it's a very like immature view of the world. I remember I heard this interview with Jordan Peterson where he was talking about how in Canada, their kind of single payer, like not tied to your employment healthcare actually promotes entrepreneurship. And to me, that's like a very nuanced view of like, yeah, like, so if you're really on this like small business, you know, entrepreneur thing, like you have to have a very childlike view if you're going to take on the Ayn Rand, you know, every man for himself, no state thing, because even for you as a small business owner, it could screw you, you know?
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, no state essentially means you have a bunch of private mini states with no accountability to anybody, right? You know, it's like the consumer is always right. And in this case, you know, those with the most material wealth, right, are the consumers of like your private security armies and whatnot. And it just sort of starts to sound very quickly like feudalism. But I think, but what I was going to say about Yaron Brook is like, my favorite Yaron thing was not him accusing me of wanting to steal his Roku. It was his debate with Sam, where he says, where they were talking about something else, that Miami condo collapse, and he ends up biting the bullet at the end of the discussion. Like, yeah, that should have been on them. They should have, you know, the tenants should have, before they signed those leases, they should have asked more questions about how often they did safety inspections.
Yeah, when I go to rent buy a condo or lease a condo, I'm gonna go into the foundation of the condo with my, you know, construction equipment and my, you know, leveling crap to make sure that it's not about to fall over. That is like instantly discrediting. Like, you should never listen to that guy again. That's insane. That's insanity.
Yeah. All right. I want to switch gears and show at least most of, I hope, before Anna gets here for the last part of the main show. She's also going to stay for the post game, I should say. The debate that I did 2 weeks ago in Lubbock, Texas.
Ooh.
Yes. This is
Lubbock.
Lubbock. My first time in Lubbock.
Did you go paintballing?
I did not.
I know some very sweet libertarians who have a paintball ranch. Old school Ron Paul supporters.
Hey, they could host a debate about libertarianism on the ranch, and then we could go play paintball after it's over. That sounds fun.
I'd love to see them again because you know, I haven't seen them in like 30 years, but sweet people.
All right, let's yeah, the parts of Lubbock I saw were my hotel and the airport and the auditorium at the law school where we had this debate. It was a very short trip, but
yeah.
paintball next time. And this right now.
Okay. Hi, thanks everyone for coming to the Immigration Law Association Socialism versus Capitalism debate. My name is Samantha Escalon, and I am the president of ILA. And I also want to give a quick thank you to Professor Strange, Dean Chapman, Blake, and Stephanie for helping me put this together. And so our speakers have a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so I'm just going to give a brief introduction to each speaker, and then we'll get started. So first up, we have Jon Miltimore. He is the managing editor of the Foundation for Economic Education.org. His writing and reporting has been the subject of articles in Time Magazine, The Wall Street Journal, CNN, Forbes, Fox News, and the Star Tribune. He previously served in editorial roles at the History Channel magazine, Intellectual Takeout, and Scout. He is an alumni of the Institute for Human Studies Journalism program, a former reporter of the Panama City News Herald, and served as an intern in the speech writing department of George W. Bush. Next up, we have Ben Burgis, and Ben is a Jacobin columnist and adjunct philosophy professor at Rutgers University, and the host of the YouTube show and podcast, Give Them an Argument. He's the author of several books, most recently Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to the speakers. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
All right. First, I want to thank Jon for participating, and Samantha and the rest for organizing this and flying us out and putting us up at a hotel. I love this. It's actually called the Overton. So for anybody who's not familiar, the Overton window is a term that political commentators often use to talk about the range of ideas that are considered to be even, realistically imaginable enough that they're even up for debate. Now, for most of my lifetime in this country, socialism was way outside of that window. And I'm not even that old. But little by little, that is starting to change. Last Thursday, the House of Representatives held a vote to, and I quote, condemn the horrors of socialism. And I'm quite certain that if they'd held this vote in 2013, it would have been unanimous. Every Democrat, every Republican, no question. In 2023, there were 86 nay votes, plus, 14 little weasels who voted present. And that's a remarkable change. In 2023, it seems a lot of politicians know that their constituents don't want them to denounce the horrors of socialism. Why not? What changed? Well, my take would be that a big part of what changed is that the fruit of the right wing's long war against labor unions and the regulatory state, the Reagan era onward, has turned back the clock to what is, in some important respects, a purer form of capitalism. Not as pure as libertarians would like, certainly, but a lot purer than what we had. Think about the difference between unionized cab drivers with health insurance and retirement plans and Uber drivers. And living under a purer form of capitalism, which is a different way of saying living in a hellscape of financial stress and economic precarity, has made a lot more Americans open to what socialists are saying. They don't want their congressmen to denounce the horrors of socialism because they associate the S word with two things. First, the tremendously positive reform proposals that Bernie Sanders has introduced to our national conversation. Things like moving toward Medicare for all, so that when you were sick, you could just see a doctor, kind of the way that if your house is on fire, the fire department doesn't meet you on the lawn to collect a copay before they put out the fire. And so that's one thing. And then the other, I think, is a little bit harder to pin down, but it's very important, which is that a lot of people can't articulate what alternative they would want, but they tell pollsters they're favorable to socialism because they have a strong intuitive sense that there's something that's just fundamentally not right about the economic structures that rule their lives. And I'm going to argue that they're right to feel this way on both counts, that socialist policies like nationalizing the health insurance industry, which is a different way of saying Medicare for all, would be tremendously beneficial in the here and now. They could also be thought of as baby steps in the direction of reorganizing the whole structure of our economy in a fundamentally more just and reasonable way. So let's touch on that part. What could that look like? Broadly speaking, socialism means social ownership of economic enterprises. Doesn't necessarily mean state ownership, although that is one form it could take. State ownership could be a form of social ownership as long as society as a whole democratically owns the state. I'm not advocating recreating East Germany. I'd like something that would be better than either that or what we have right now. Social ownership could also mean turning businesses currently owned by stockholders or by individual rich people into worker-owned cooperatives. And I know that if we're ever lucky enough, from my perspective, to get to a fully socialist economy, look, the process of real historical change is always messy, it's always unpredictable. I'm sure it would involve a mishmash of both of those forms that I just mentioned, as well as various forms of local and community ownership. And I also know that if it ever happens, it's not going to be an overnight change. It's going to be a very long process. But I do think it should be our North Star, the goal we never lose sight of, both because every step we take in that direction makes life better for the majority of Americans, and because so many of the cruelest things about the society that we have right now are downstream from the basic way economic power works under capitalism. Think, for example, about our frankly psychotic levels of economic inequality. CEOs making hundreds of times the salary of average workers. And then think about the alternative. So if Amazon, for example, were a worker co-op, you might not have completely flat wage scales. You might have to pay some people a little bit more than others to incentivize them to take particularly demanding jobs with a lot of stress and responsibility, or on the other end to take particularly dangerous or unpleasant jobs. But if you showed up to the meeting where everyone was voting on wage scales and said, hey guys, I was thinking, this whole company was Jeff's idea, so why don't we pay him so much more than the rest of us that he'll be able to buy his own spaceship? Yeah, good luck. I don't think you're going to win the vote. So that brings me to my final point. I know that some of you are probably thinking, okay, Ben, socialism sounds lovely and all, but it's just not realistic. It goes against human nature. People aren't kind and cooperative the way socialism would need them to be. They're selfish, they're competitive, so it wouldn't work. And I think that concern gets things exactly backwards. Because if human beings were angels, capitalism would be vastly less objectionable than it actually is. We wouldn't need to worry about bosses abusing their power over workers because we just trust them to be kind and benevolent. We wouldn't need to worry about all sorts of avoidable human misery coming out of these levels of economic inequality because people with less could always fundamentally count on the generosity of people with more. But I'm afraid we're not angels, so we'll just have to be socialists instead.
Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you all for attending here today. And thanks to Samantha and Ben and David and the university for putting this on. It's an incredibly important conversation to have. And we need more discussions like this. There's too much silencing going on campuses today. We need more of this. We need more interaction. Let's talk about ideas. It's like the great English poet Jon Miltimore once said, let truth and falsehood grapple. Whoever knew truth to get the worst of that fight. We should also be thankful that we're participating in this debate. I couldn't help but think of the hundreds of millions of people who wouldn't have been allowed to participate in a debate about the virtue of capitalism. Think Pol Pot would have allowed that? Or Mao? Lenin? Stalin? I don't think so. And why not? I say this not to just score cheap points at the expense of my opponent. Well, that's partly the reason I do it. But I want to make a simple point. Economic freedom and political freedom, they go hand in hand. You can't just put the word democratic in front of socialism and render it benign. History shows this. And it shows it most recently in Venezuela. We saw Hugo Chavez. He was a Bernie Sanders style populist, right? He talked about wage justice. He talked about evil corporations. By his second term, he had dropped the democratic part of socialists. He just called himself a socialist. He said, let it all be nationalized. And that's what he did. Chavez nationalized everything from mining to agriculture, to tourism, communications, and beyond. And it worked for a few years, right? It did. You can go back and see, as recently as 2013, you can see some publications, I think it was Salon, that talked about the economic miracle of Venezuelan socialism. Raise your hand if you think what happened in Venezuela was a miracle. Anyone? It wasn't a miracle. We know that. It was a nightmare. And about 8 million people have fled that country. Venezuela was in the top 10 wealthiest countries in 1950. In 1959, it had a higher GDP per capita than the United States. Today, people are starving. And it's one thing to read about 1,000,000% inflation, right? It's a different thing to hear about it from people who fled. I've had the opportunity to talk to a handful of people, 5 or 6, who fled Venezuela. It's heartbreaking. Their parents hand them a fistful of money and send them to America to escape. Their families are still there. The median wage is about about $8 a month. Bag of onions costs about $2 a month, to put that in perspective. This is a history we can't repeat. We need to learn from history, right? We need to make that simple point I made: political freedom, economic freedom, they go hand in hand. And I don't think enough people understand this. It's funny, when I came, I told people I was coming down to debate capitalism and socialism. People were a little surprised, they were shocked. Like, people are still talking about this? And I get where they're coming from. I was 10 years old when the Berlin Wall came down. I remember the euphoria that day. People in the streets celebrating. This evil empire that had caused so much pain and suffering was collapsing before our eyes. I was young, but you knew something big was happening, and it was. The system was collapsing for everyone to see. And there was a sense that capitalism had triumphed, right? Socialism had been vanquished. Except that didn't happen. Ideas do not die as easily as political systems do. And Marxism lives on. In some ways, it's ascendant. We speak like Marxists today often. We use language, even sometimes without knowing it. We view the world through these class structures now. And this isn't progress. And in some ways, you have to hand it to Marx and his disciples, really. It's almost impressive in a way. Marx might have been a failure as a man. He was a lousy husband. He was a terrible father. He was a drunkard. He was a racist. He was a horrible economist. But he did something incredible. He turned this word capitalism into a dirty word. And it's astonishing when you look at that, because in the 2 centuries since Marx was born, we've seen this amazing progress. When Marx was born in 1818, absolute poverty was at 90% globally, 90%. We forget how mean the average existence was for somebody before capitalism. They lived at about 2,000 calories a day, the average person. People were caught in nutritional traps. They couldn't even work. They lacked the energy to work. Capitalism changed all of that. It ushered in this industrial explosion that Marx despised. He looked at it as exploitive. But it changed the world in ways that we can't even imagine today. It unleashed entrepreneurship, ingenuity. And you don't need a bunch of GDP data to show you that, right? You look back at life in 1820, you look at life today. And in fact, you go to the year I was born, 1979. You look at all the things we had, dishwashers and all those things, you know, automobiles, but look at absolute poverty. It had fallen from 90% to 36% when I was born. And get this, in my lifetime alone, absolute poverty, according to the World Bank, has fallen from 36% to 8%. This is the power of capitalism. So let's ask, what is capitalism, right? I'll make it very simple. Capitalism is economic freedom, okay? I can do it in one word. Best definition for capitalism you can find. It's consent. It's consent within an economic system. And it's this idea that I can't take from you and you can't take from me. All action is voluntary, okay? It's mutual exchange. This is a healthy system. And it doesn't just breed prosperity. It breeds harmony. And it's the opposite of socialism. In the womb of every socialist, you'll find force. They want to use coercion. And again, I don't look at Ben as a bad person. I think Ben wants what's best. I truly do. But force is not the way to build a productive society or a peaceful one. And I'll close my initial remarks just with a quote from the great economist and philosopher Ludwig von Mises. And he said, when somebody offers you a glass of cold milk and a glass of potassium cyanide, they're not offering you a drink. They're offering you a choice between life and death. And that truly is the choice between socialism and capitalism. We need to get this right. It's incumbent on us to get it right if we want to leave our children a world better than the one we found.
Okay, thank you, Ben and John. And now we're going to transition into a conversation between Ben and John, and we're going to listen in.
All right. If this makes sense to you, I will, we were originally going to do 15 minutes each, and then we said, let's make it a little bit more flexible and informal than that. But if I could just do a few minutes in some of the stuff you just said, and then kind of let you do that, and then we'll transition it to be more open exchange. Sure. All right. So the first thing you said is you were thinking about the hundreds of millions of people who wouldn't have been able to have a discussion about the merits of capitalism. And that made me think about all the people who lived in countries where they wouldn't have been allowed to have conversation about the merits of socialism. If you tried to show up to a debate like this on the socialist side, in, for example, Chile, under the reign of General Pinochet, who was installed in a CIA-backed coup to overthrow the democratic socialist Salvador Allende in 1973, you probably would have literally been hanging out of a helicopter. That's what they did to dissident socialists and labor unionists in Chile at the time that people like Milton Friedman were flying down to give General Pinochet economic advice about how to do shock therapy and invent a lot of what we now think of as neoliberalism. If you were in Indonesia under Suharto, who committed in East Timor, proportionally speaking, the largest genocide since Hitler, that the terms of the percentage of the population that he killed, and who certainly committed mass murder within Indonesia itself on a blood-curdling scale, you certainly wouldn't have been able to advocate for the virtues of socialism. Suharto, too, was enthusiastically supported by the United States for standard Cold War anti-communist reasons. In fact, if you think about the four people that John just mentioned, Pol Pot, Mao, Lenin, Stalin, The first one, I think, is an accounting error. He's transferred that item between sides of the Cold War, because actually what happened in Cambodia is that when Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge, was engaged in precisely the opposite of what socialists of every kind have always advocated, and deindustrializing the country. Vietnam, authoritarian communist country, plenty of criticisms, but Vietnam invaded Cambodia to stop the killing, and the United States openly supported Pol Pot as a thorn in the side of Vietnam, which had just embarrassed us, of course, over the course of the 60s and 70s, and its backer, the Soviet Union. This is not a conspiracy theory. You can look at the UN votes, right? The votes to give Pol Pot, rather than the Vietnamese-backed government, the Cambodia's UN seat, for example. He mentioned Venezuela. He said Chavez nationalized everything. I cannot overstate how false that is. Even by the time Hugo Chavez died, the public sector in Venezuela was a little bit larger than the United States, not much, as an overall employer, the percentage of the population employed by the public sector. But it was a little bit larger than the United States, way smaller. It was like a smaller percentage than France, never mind any of the Nordic countries. And while we're on the subject of the Nordic countries, I do find it very significant that the one place in the world where he could claim, oh, look, democratic socialist, but then something that if you're sort of squinting enough to make everything blurry, you could make look like communism, even though it had a smaller public sector than France. He didn't mention any of the places where democratic socialists have had the most profound effect on their societies. Places like Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. Now, what libertarians and conservatives always say about these places is, oh, no, see, those are capitalist countries. No, I agree. Those are places where democratic socialist policies, while they've been implemented and had a tremendously beneficial effect on people's lives, literally making the difference between life and death for many reasons, many preventable deaths, from disease, for example. There are many situations in which people might die in the United States and live in Sweden. But they haven't completely transcended capitalism, as I would use that term. But here's the point. There is no possible way to classify Venezuela as socialist and Sweden or Norway as capitalist. It cannot be done, because the public sector as an employer is a way bigger part of the economy in those countries than it is in Venezuela. In fact, Norway is an almost ideal laboratory comparison, because both of them are countries that are very oil dependent. Both of them have big public sectors that are inflated by a largely state-owned, in much the same way, oil company. And if you go and look at Matt Booning's People's Policy Project, their stats on this, the overall amount of wealth in the Norwegian economy that's held by the Norwegian state is way bigger than the overall amount of wealth held by the Venezuelan state, in the Venezuelan economy. And by any conceivable measures, places like Norway and Sweden are some of the most livable societies that have ever been built by human beings. They consistently cream global happiness surveys, even though these are places where the sun is shining for like 2 hours a year and it's incredibly cold. That, I think, tells you something.
Can I interject now, Ben? I won't be able to respond to all this unless we get some back and forth.
Go for it.
So there's a lot to respond to there. If you talk to anyone from Finland or Sweden or Norway, they're going to tell you, we're not socialists. And their own political leaders say, no. And they're right. They're free market economies. They're like ours. They're a mixed economy. These aren't socialist states. These are mixed economies. And as far as Venezuela, it's interesting. We've seen this over and over and over again, where it's not real socialism once it fails. Christian Niemitz has a book on this, and it goes painstaking into the detail.
What's the standard for real socialism?
Excuse me, I gave you the floor. Now I'm talking. If you look, it's always the same story. You can go read Jacobin, you can go read Salon, you can go read Mother Jones, and it's socialist until it's not, until it fails. We've seen this time and again. And let's talk about Cambodia for a minute. Pol Pot. Does anybody know where Pol Pot was educated? Anyone? Ben? He was educated in Paris, okay? He studied, he wrote a dissertation on Marxism. Many in the Khmer Rouge did the same. They studied these ideas seriously. And when they came, it was almost like we were exporting Marxism to these other countries. They came back, they took their ideas. And if you can look at how the degree to which they planned this society, they looked at every family. You know what? This is hilarious. Everybody got 2 desserts a week in the first year, okay? The next year, everybody was going to get dessert every other day. And by year 3, everybody, I think, was going to get dessert every day of the week. And they said, okay, here's how many knives and scissors we need. They planned this entire economy as if a handful of people can get together and they have the knowledge to possess, to engineer the society in a way that makes sense. This is what the Nobel Prize winning economist F.A. Hayek called the knowledge problem. You have all these bean counters in rooms, they get together and they think they possess the knowledge. You can't. Nobody can engineer an economy so vast and complex. It takes incredible hubris to think you can do this. It's astonishing to me, something so complex that we think, well, we just get some smart people in a room together and they can figure this out and they can make things better. And I want to touch on one last thing. Ben earlier was talking about labor unions and the need for them and how they're ascended today. I don't think you can find better examples of unions being crushed. And you can go back and study the early Soviet Union. The first thing Lenin did, you had these small Soviets. They thought, finally, we have control, we have power. He abolished the right to strike. In capitalism, if you don't want to work, you go find another job. In the USSR, they put a bullet in your head or sent you to a concentration camp. These union workers who threw their lot behind the Bolsheviks were crushed. They were absolutely crushed. And Lenin didn't shy away from terror. Again, it's like I said, because this is necessary for the revolution. You can go back and find this grand language in Marx about ushering in this social revolution. I'll share one quote with you that I found fascinating. We are a workers' party because we see in the coming battle between finance and labor the end of the structure of the century. We are on the side of labor and against finance. The value of labor under socialism will be determined by its value to the state, to the whole community. Does that sound like a good idea to anyone? Does that sound like a good idea to you, Ben?
Well, if it's my turn to talk again, I would say that that I'm really confused by what the standard is for what you would consider to be real socialism. So I said what I mean by socialism in the opening statement. Jon has a different definition in mind. Fair enough, right? We can talk about the desirability of socialism as he defines it. But I would be fascinated to know, what's the definition of real socialism that would somehow perform the minor semantic miracle of including Venezuela, but excluding Norway, even though the state sector is a much bigger part of the economy in Norway than in Venezuela? We heard a lot about how bad Pol Pot was, which, for the record, I agree. Pol Pot was really bad. So I think it's good that I don't have a lot of nice things to say about the capital C communist countries in the Cold War, but one thing you can say about it is that the Soviet bloc and the Vietnam tried to stop him, and the CIA, the United States, openly supported him. And I think it was good to try to stop him and bad to support him. But pulling back from that specific case, and I think even by the standards of capital C communism, which is certainly not something I advocate, Pol Pot's Cambodia was about as different from, say, the Soviet Union in what it was trying to do to the economy in many ways than you could hope for to find in a society, right? The entire trajectory of the rest of those countries was industrialization, and in Cambodia you have intentional deindustrialization. That's very different. Now he says it violates his capitalist ideals. Fair enough, and it violates my socialist ideals too. But I also want to take, I think it would be an incredible waste of everybody's time to spend our time already talking about the demerits of a society that's nothing like anything that either of us has ever advocated. And I think it's a much better idea to talk about what somebody like me would advocate and somebody like Jon would be opposed to. Because ultimately, if you're talking to a democratic socialist and you spend your whole time talking about the horrors of Stalinism, then that's a little bit like arguing about religion with like a, with a Baptist and spending your whole time talking about all the terrible things that the Roman Catholic Church has done. And what about the Inquisition? And what about the Crusades? And say, okay, dude, you got the wrong number. Go take that up with somebody who's going to defend the infallibility of the Pope to you. Now, Jon says that you can't separate economic freedom from political freedom, and I just want to make two really quick points about this, because this is, I think, right. Unlike the stuff about Cambodia, this one is actually right at the core of what we actually disagree about. Because first, accepting for the sake of argument Jon's understanding of what economic freedom is, that the lesson of history is unambiguously, of course you can separate so-called economic freedom from political freedom. It has been separated over and over and over again in many different countries. He says that in capitalism you have a right to strike. That would be a hell of a surprise to people in a lot of capitalist countries where they have not had the right to strike. Now, Jon can say, well, those weren't real capitalist countries because real capitalism means that you have political freedom, but then you can't separate economic freedom from political freedom, just becomes an uninformative tautology. Certainly, as a matter of history, there are many of the worst and most murderous authoritarian countries in history, in the history of the last 100 years, have in fact presided over economies that were largely in privately owned hands. That's one point. Second point, let's talk about economic freedom, because that's where Jon ended his opening statement. He talked about how capitalism is all about voluntariness and consent, and socialism is about force and coercion. And I think that is 100% wrong. I think when you say, oh, capitalism, respecting capitalist property rights, that's really what we're talking about, right? Saying, don't take away some from to give to others, either by doing things like Medicare for all, those baby steps I talked about, or by trying to move towards an economy where you didn't have a separation between a class of workers and class of capitalists in much the way I was talking about in my opening statement. So no, you can't do that because that's coercion. That violates voluntariness. Okay, what's the principle here? If the principle is you can't take away somebody's property that's theirs, then the question is theirs in which sense? Certainly can't be legally theirs. You can't say, oh, people have a moral right to hold on to whatever property they sort of hold a legal title to, because then, of course, if it's being done through a political process, you've changed the laws, you have, for example, passed a law to tax people, or you have passed a law to nationalize something, then legally it is not their property. So what we're talking about is what's morally theirs, what people have a moral claim to, but then saying it's morally wrong to take away what people have a moral claim to is completely vacuous. It's completely uninformative. I could sign on to that. A lot of those, a lot of those capitalist and communist dictators that Jon was going on about, I think somewhat off topic for debate with me, but fine. They could sign on to it too, right? Because everybody believes that people have a moral right to whatever they have a morally legitimate claim to. The real debate is always, what do people have a morally legitimate claim to? What is our theory of legitimate holdings? Is it that just let the chips fall where they may in a free market, or do we believe in something more like John Rawls's theory of justice, that in fact the economic institutions are right if you would endorse them if you didn't know who you were going to be? You didn't know if you're going to be born into a rich family or a poor family. You didn't know if you're going to have the particular set of skills it would take to climb the ladder of upward mobility. Then would you endorse that society? And there's a really substantive debate to be had between, just sticking with those two examples for the sake of brevity, because I want to throw back to Jon, but there's a really substantive debate to be had between those two conceptions of what makes something a morally legitimate claim on a piece of property, but it has absolutely nothing to do with coercion. Right? That's just a giant red herring. What we're always arguing about is who has a moral right to what the distribution should be. Of course, whether it's with a no trespassing sign or a letter from the IRS, any possible distribution of scarce resources right? Some people are excluded from using resources that are held by others is always going to be enforced by coercion. That's inevitable in any possible society. The real question is always which distribution of resources should we enforce?
Yeah, I guess I'll respond to that. There's a few things. And to me, it's quite simple. You don't have a moral claim on other people's stuff. You just don't. You know, you can go back to the philosophy of this where Locke talks about once you mix your labor with something, that it's yours. And people don't have the right to take that from you. Now, today, we say that the state has the right to take your property. They have the legal right. They have a monopoly on force. And what happens if you don't pay your taxes? Well, they'll exercise that force, right? People have to follow it. This is sort of like legal plunder, in the words of Bastiat, the 19th century economist. And he saw the law being perverted in this way, where we create government to protect life, liberty, and property. That's its purpose. But Bastiat saw, no, government's becoming a tool of plunder. We're going to go take it from you without your consent. We're going to use it for some sort of purpose over here that we think is good. And we have the moral claim to do that. And I reject that claim. I want to go back, and I think Ben made a really good point talking about defining socialism, okay? This isn't easy to do, by the way. And I think it's especially difficult with Marxists because they like to change the definition of socialism a lot. And I'll concede something. There never has been an entirely capitalist state, nor has there ever been an entirely socialist state. You think of the most prominent examples of socialism in history, and like Lenin's war communism. Well, Lenin backed off that pretty fast. He instituted his own market reforms known as the New Economic Policy because it was a disaster. And Lenin himself conceded it wasn't working. And same with Stalin's efforts to collectivize farming when he declared war on the kulaks, starved millions. It was a disaster, and Stalin himself returned a percentage of land to the peasants to own and operate themselves. And guess what? Those were the most productive parcels of land in the Soviet Union. They helped keep the collectivized farming upright because they were so much more productive. And it's the same thing with Mao's Great Leap Forward. Millions died. It was an utter disaster. GDP collapsed. And what came next? It was the household responsibility policy that they ushered in I think 1978 or 1979. And they said, this isn't working. And China, communist China, privatized mass amounts of their economy. And guess what? Poverty collapsed in communist China. You can go look up the data. Anybody have an idea in China today, the people that live in absolute poverty? It's less than 1%. And you can track that. It followed as China went on this mass privatization, policy. And my point in reciting all this is no, there's never been a country that's entirely capitalist either. The United States, from the onset, like it had things like slavery, which is a evil coercive policy. It's not capitalism. They had tariffs. They had these things that were going to extract things. It was not a capitalist utopia. Right after the Constitution was ratified, one of the first things lawmakers in Washington wanted to do was pass a whiskey tax, right? Like they're gonna, that made people angry, and they scrapped that pretty quick. But they said, no, you don't have a right to our property. This was the ideals that we fought a war for. But I think if you do look at socialism, you see there are moments like even the hardcore command style economies, when they exist, they retreat from that very quickly, and they retreat from that for a reason. They don't have the knowledge to control this economy in a way that makes sense, and they've been disastrous everywhere they've been tried. And maybe Ben's right. Maybe somewhere we'll find the secret sauce, and we'll get socialism right. That we're gonna have socialism work. I'll tell you. You can go ask the president of Denmark if they're a socialist economy. There's things that we can look up. This isn't hard to measure. We have indexes that rank countries by the amount of economic freedom they have. It's ridiculous to think that Finland in Norway were real socialism, but Venezuela was not. I'll go back to it. Anybody that wants to go to a computer and Google, Venezuela was real socialism until it failed.
According to who?
Until it failed. To Jacobin, to Salon. Go back and, yeah.
Find in the Jacobin article where it says Venezuela is a socialist country.
We can go back and look at this.
That. You also notice I never said that Venezuela is real socialism and Finland is not. I said that if what you mean by socialism is state ownership.
I'll finish my point. I didn't interrupt you. I'll finish my point.
Venezuela, that is just an empirical fact.
I'll finish my point. Go back, read the speeches of Hugo Chavez. He literally said, "Let it all be nationalized." He was a true believer, right? He was going to usher in the socialist utopia. It's a living example of the failure of trying to plan an economy with a handful of people. Maduro, and just recently, Maduro started turning to privatization to try to say, like, this isn't working. They quietly gave properties back to capitalists. Now, the state's still taking a massive share, but they're admitting we don't have the knowledge to control the economy. You know what? Harnessing self-interest of people working together, that's how you have economic growth. That is how we've witnessed so much over the last 2 centuries. And it's, you know, I have a feeling that we'll be arguing this 100 years from now. Hopefully not. But it's one of these things, if you look, you compare wealth and freedom in capitalist countries to those socialist countries, it's really not even close. And I'll make a final point. And this is where I think a capitalist society is more harmonious. Because socialism at its core, it's driven by envy. They want you to envy what Elon Musk has, okay? Those billionaires. I follow some Marxists on Twitter. It's nonstop churning, making you want what somebody else has and what somebody else has earned. And it's interesting. I thought of this recently. In the 10 Commandments, there's this, they say, thou shalt not covet, right? And that makes sense to people. They said, don't covet their wife, or don't covet their wife's servant, or male or female. And there's this thing like, don't even covet their house or their donkey. And that, for years, I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? Like, don't covet their donkey. But I think the message is there. We're not supposed to look at other people's stuff and want it, and to say, no, that's ours. I think that breeds in people a very unhealthy thing, to sit there and yearn for somebody else's possessions. And I think that's why this debate keeps happening. I think Marxists are human envy is something we all struggle with, right? Every one of us has looked out in the world and said, like, I want that. And I think Marxists tap into that very effectively. And they use that to try to make people, to breed discontent in people, and to look at the world and say, the world's not right. I should have more, and give us power. It's a rotten philosophy.
Yeah, literally what he just said, you could say to a Soviet dissident, oh, you're looking out of the world and saying, oh, I should be able to start my own business. This isn't right. I should have more. Now, the real question is, should you, in fact, be able to have more? In other words, what is a reasonable moral principle that tells us who should have what? Now, I explained earlier why just saying, well, you can't take other people's stuff, begs the question. Why it's a completely vacuous and uninformative statement, because the real question is always, what is, morally speaking, your stuff? Again, the stuff you have a legal title to? If so, all of his objections to the government taking things away disappear, into thin air, right? Like a vampire at sunrise, because legally speaking, whatever proportion of your money you owe on taxes is the property of the IRS. So it's not that. So it's a moral claim, right? And if you have the courage of your convictions, you should be able to argue the moral claim on its own. Here's why I find, Rawlsian justice theory, unconvincing. Make your case, fine, but don't change the subject of this thing about coercion and voluntariness. Also, don't change the subject if you're arguing about anything that I would call socialism or have ever called socialism, or the Jacobin magazine has ever called socialism, or at least the kind of socialism that we would advocate. Don't change the subject to the kinds of things that we've always been extremely critical of, like the Soviet Union. I also find it fascinating that out of On the one hand, Jon says you can't separate economic and political freedom. On the other hand, he says that that China is a capitalist success story. Well, if China is a capitalist success story and economic freedom means capitalism, you damn well can separate political and economic freedom, and China has done that. I want to talk about the economic freedom indexes because this is the only real counter-argument I heard to the point that, look, the Norwegian state, the Swedish state, the Finnish state, the Danish state, I think you're thinking of the Prime Minister of Denmark, Rasmussen, who said, oh, no, there's nothing socialist about any of this. Yeah, guy is representing a center-right party. Ask a representative of the Social Democratic Party that actually built his country's welfare state whether he thinks those achievements had anything to do with the ideals of socialism, and you'll get a completely different answer. I never said that any of these were real socialist countries. I'm just stating the obvious fact that if what you're talking about is the proportion, the role of the public sector in the state, then the fact would remain that these are much more socialist by that standard than Venezuela is. We never heard from Jon the alternate standard that would somehow render Venezuela more socialist than Norway or Denmark or Sweden or Finland. All we heard is that Chavez said some super socialist things in speeches, which I guess matters more than the actual proportion of the Venezuelan economy that's taken up by the public sector. I have more to say about this, but I am reading body language here and thinking that there's probably time to go to the closing statements.
Yes, please.
All right.
Set to go?
Yeah, sure. All right. I will just transition seamlessly to saying what I was saying, but saying it up here. So, we heard a lot of things that I find really interesting just now. We heard about economic freedom indexes, for example. We heard a lot about Marx and Marxism. But I'm a little bit confused because in a denunciation of Marx and Marxism, putting aside, I agree that Marx probably had a drinking problem. So if the question under dispute is like, is Karl Marx in heaven, then we can have a whole different debate about that. But if the question under dispute is about the man and his ideas, then I'm real confused about how I heard a denunciation of Marx and Marxism that was combined with a restatement of something that Marx spent quite a bit of his time talking about. The core of Karl Marx's theory of history is that the development of the forces of production over time leads to the changes in the economic structure of any society. As an old structure becomes a fetter on the further development of the forces of production, then you get a new one that comes in. And even if you read the Communist Manifesto, opening pages are on and on and on about what we just heard essentially from Jon, which is capitalism is better than feudalism. I agree. I also think extending the democracy from politics to the economy, which is what socialism needs to be, would be better than capitalism. That's what we disagree about. We don't disagree about whether the Soviet Union was a model society, so I'm very confused by how much time we spent talking about that in this debate. But I do want to talk about countries that are more relevant to our disagreements, because we heard the stuff about the Whiskey Rebellion, that, oh, that was taken away, like that was like sort of a positive example of the revolutionary fervor of 1776 being extended because they were taking away what was theirs. Well, I mean, if we're hearing an argument against taxation, he's not just arguing against what I want. He's arguing against things that the overwhelming majority of ordinary people have tremendously positive views about, things like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare for seniors, etc., all of which are redistributive taxpayer-funded programs. Economic Freedom Index, real quick. You can read an article I wrote about this for Jacobin in fall 2021 called Economic Freedom Rankings Don't Tell Us Anything About Capitalism. So I'm just mentioning that to show my work. But if you actually look into the methodology of these things, they're invariably a disaster. You end up with these bizarre results like, Haiti is less capitalist than Sweden. In fact, one of the most famous of these rankings said Ukraine became less capitalist between 1980 and 2000, when the Soviet Union fell halfway in between. How do they get that result? They get that result because this is the Fraser Institute rankings, because they define all the bad things as definitionally socialist and all the good things as definitionally capitalist. If there's security and rule of law and less corruption, they define all that as capitalism. You get capitalism points for that, even if half your economy is nationalized. So, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, places that have actually gone further than any society in the world in implementing the stuff that I want and John doesn't. Not as far as I would like. You're right, there's still capitalist countries and the foundations of their economy. I would prefer that if you still have to have a market sector because of knowledge problems, it at least be a non-market sector of competing worker co-ops. But these are all places where these economic freedom rankings will tell you, oh no, these are super capitalist, to which I would simply say, man, if we could have a much bigger percentage of the economy controlled by the public sector than Venezuela, never mind France, never mind the United States, and still be capitalist, then I hope that John, even if he wouldn't go as far as I would at least endorse that.
Before I start my closing statement, I just want to respond to one or 2 points Ben made. And in his defense, I get why he doesn't want to talk about the USSR. If I was a socialist, I wouldn't want to talk about the USSR either. But it's simply not true that this was something that all socialists rejected. If you look, you with both Maoism and Stalinism, you can go back and find all these people gushing over these ideologies. Balzac, and has anyone seen the movie Mr. Jones? Walter Duranty is the bureau chief. He's an American journalist. He wins a Pulitzer Prize. Oh, he loved the Soviet Union, and he hid the atrocities being committed there. A British journalist went and exposed him, and he publicly lied and denounced him for this. But this idea that everybody understood that, so the Soviet Union was bad, Maoism was bad, is simply not true. You can find dozens of quotes of people gushing about this is the future. We finally figured it out. And I think that's important. Now, again, in Ben's defense, I get why he doesn't want to talk about that. Like, let's turn the page. We don't want to talk about those. Let's look at socialism in the future. But I want to touch this for a minute, like on some of the threats that would face us today. They're very different than, nobody is really advocating, with the possible exception of a few people, of these command-style economies. And that's good, right? What we're seeing now is sort of like this incremental, I don't even want to call it socialism. I think it's kind of what Lenin called state capitalism or economic fascism or whatever you want to call it, where the state is just involved in all these aspects of our life. And it regulates more and more, it taxes more and more. And I think that is a threat. It's a different threat than a Bolshevik takeover, right? It's different. But if you look today, it's more like that, to quote Bastiat again, the government is that great fiction by everybody wants to live at the expense of someone else, right? And that's what we're seeing. We have a $31 trillion national debt, folks. That is snowballing rapidly. Social Security is going to go insolvent in 2035, which means there's going to be adjustments and more taxes, which means that that's going to increase faster. Medicare has its own unfunded liabilities. This is getting serious. It's all based on this idea that we can live at the government's going to pay for all this, and we're doing it. There's $1 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see. Okay, this is dangerous. Soon we're going to be spending $1 trillion every year just to finance the federal debt. It's pretty shocking. And there are no easy solutions to this, sadly. Like, capitalism is a powerful engine, but even that, it's going to be difficult to dig out of this. I have 3 children. I'm terrified for their future and their children. I don't think we understand what we're doing, the hole we're digging ourselves in. And again, is that socialism? I don't think it's the same thing as socialism. I think it's a state capitalism where, basically you have government and private industry kind of working together and rigging the game. And Ben wasn't wrong. He brought up something very important. Income inequality. It is worse. But if you look, income inequality has exploded since 1971. It's exploded. And that is when the state took over, like basically they got off the gold standard. right? And we went to a total fiat currency where we just have a credit card now. And we can, you look, Congress rarely budgets anymore. We just run up massive deficits. And to think there's no threat to that, I think is a mistake. It's different than the threat of old style socialism. But if I leave you with one thing today, I think it is, I want you to think seriously about the means we use to build a society, okay? I think socialists often focus on the ends. They want this great society, and they're comfortable using coercion and just taking from people without their consent. I don't think that is the way to build a peaceful, harmonious society. When you can look at other people's stuff and say, I want what is theirs. It builds resentment, it builds discontent. And that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for attending this conversation. I enjoyed it a lot.
All right. Social Security is going insolvent. Can we get a fact check on that?
Man, he played all the hits, all the pro-capitalist tired argument hits. Like, homeboy brought up the gold standard. It had nothing to do with labor unions being dismantled, like, in the 1970s and on. It was the gold standard. That's definitely, that's what happened.
Can I play this for you for that debate? Hold on. Oh no, that's not it. Sorry. Hold on. There it is. Can you hear that?
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, no, definitely the most important thing that's changed since the 1970s that could explain economic inequality is the gold standard. Like,
yeah,
it's
okay. So this is the second time I've watched the debate, and the thing that really gets under my skin about his argument, especially when he leans on the, oh, you're just jealous, it's envy, it's wrong to want to take what other people earned. But what he's missing is the people who generate the revenue for these companies are the workers, but they don't get their fair share of that revenue, of the money that is earned through their hard work, through their labor, right? So he just thinks, no, the workers are just, they're just tools for the executives to profit from. They're not people who have earned, that income. It's insane.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, well, I mean, and he even, like, you notice, like, the one time, he had the whole thing about how, he was, like, really intent on the coercion, and capitalism was all about consent and voluntariness and all that stuff, and just, like, would not, kind of ignored the point about how, like, we're always arguing about which distribution of scarce resources to enforce. We're not arguing about whether to enforce it. Like, it's always involuntary on behalf of people who don't agree to it, right? But he was so intent on that, but, like, I kept trying to push, like, okay, look, the real argument is about which distribution we should enforce. Tell us what your theory is that says, like, which distribution that is. I know it's not anything like Rawls saying that, like, whatever set of social institutions we'd all endorse if we didn't know what kind of family we're going to be born into and all that, right? I know that's not it, right? So what is it? And the one time he did, like, 10 seconds of it, it was this thing about John Locke and, like, mixing your labor with, with the land, which is, like, okay, one, I never understood. Like, that always just seems like, that always just kind of seems like a dog's theory of property, right? You mix your urine with it, and it's but, like,
hey, that's not bad. That might be better than the John Locke thing, actually. People peeing on stuff.
Okay, if we do believe that, which we shouldn't, but if we do, then it's like, okay, but who's actually doing the labor mixing? Like who's like in an actual agricultural example, I mean, it's like it's not the CEO of the agribusiness who's, like, mixing their labor with the land. Like, so if that's what entitles you to something, I mean, it should still be the workers.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was so frustrating for you to watch you go through the whole, like, veil of ignorance thing, all this stuff, and then he just went right back to, like, what he was saying originally, which, he didn't, it was like you were having two different debates. He also really didn't want to talk about the Nordic countries.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
He's like, ugh, that's a big problem for me.
Yeah, because there was like a center-right prime minister in Denmark who said that like Norway's achievements have nothing to do with socialism, which is like okay, like so do you think everybody in Denmark agrees with that? Like is that like is Danes just unanimous about it? I mean, they have socialist parties in Denmark. Like they were the ones who actually built that welfare state. What do you think they think?
Yeah.
You know what? Also, like I saw a debate with Glenn Lowry and Richard Wolff. Did you ever watch that?
No, not yet. I remember you.
I think I was telling you about that. But there's a part where Glenn Lowry's an economic conservative. He's kind of like a libertarian, and there's a part in that debate where he's just like, "Yeah, the Nordic model would probably be better than what we're doing." It's like, oh, all right, okay, cool.
Can we have it?
Yeah, we'll call it whatever you want. I mean, we call it whatever you want. Who cares? Let's drop the
let's call
label.
It like just do that. Like I mean that would be like such a quantum leap forward in terms of what we want to have happen, right? It's like, so we could do like a nationalized oil company and a huge welfare state and like really strong unions. And it's like, okay, cool. Lowryism, let's do it.
Sounds great. No.
Lowryism, yes, I love that. Absolutely.
The other thing I wanted to quickly mention is, he's very focused on coercion, right? Like, coercion. It's so, but I don't know about you guys. We live in a system where if you don't go to work, you end up on the streets.
Right.
And you die. Like you don't have food, you don't have shelter, you don't have healthcare, you don't have the bare necessities, and you die. I mean, look what happened, midway through the pandemic when certain red states were like, these bolstered unemployment benefits, we got to do away with them. So people are desperate enough to go back to work, even when they don't feel safe doing so in the middle of the pandemic.
We're very open about the idea that that's why they were doing it. That
that's coercion. Like, come on.
All of that, like all of that right wing stuff during the like late pandemic about government's printing money, so nobody wants to work. How can I compete with this? Like I need them to stop doing this so people go back to work. It's like really it was amazing, right? I mean, it's completely giving the game away. That it's like, yeah, this is what you want. Is for people to be desperate enough to work for whatever you're willing to pay them.
100%. I mean, what the Federal Reserve is doing right now with raising interest rates to intentionally increase the unemployment rate to solve inflation, that's another form of coercion, right? For those who maybe have taken their time to get back to work for whatever reason, I better find that job right away. I better be a good worker. I better not ask for a raise. I mean, there's so many coercive elements to the system that we're currently living under, but this guy lives in this fantasy world where he somehow doesn't see it, or either he doesn't see it, which is incredible to me. I don't know if I believe that, or he's just straight up lying about the existence of coercion under a capitalist model.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's RM does a better Slavoj Žižek impression than mine, so I won't try to do it. But it's like it's the ideology, it's it's a powerful drug, right? That it's like you sort of so totally internalize that ideological assumption that like freedom just means having like everybody getting to keep exactly as much wealth as they can get in a free market. That coercion just means taking it even away, that like, yeah, I mean, look, if you, if you don't have a place to live, if you're homeless and you try to squat in a building that's owned by some, like, I mean, God, in some cases, even now, well, less Russian oligarchs than was the case a couple of years ago, but like, is owned by like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in some cases.
Mm-hmm,
like they'll own all these buildings that they're not using for anything, just like park money there basically as an investment. And it's like, yeah, if you're a homeless person, you try to sleep in that building, right? Then literally the cops are going to come and violently kick you out of it, right? But you're just, but in his view of the world, that just doesn't count as coercion because he thinks it's justified. And it's like, okay, well, I don't, but like, can we at least argue about that and not the coercion thing? Like whether it's like justified coercion, because that seemed like, yeah, you're going to have to coercively enforce whatever distribution you've got. Like the argument is always about which one that is. I mean, if you're a diabetic and you want to take some insulin from the pharmacy without paying for it, then you're going to very quickly be coercively stopped from doing so, right? I mean, that's so like, and okay, you can have your libertarian theory of property rights and say that's justified, but I mean, it's like that's what the argument should be about.
Yeah, 100%. The other thing is, I mean, our taxes are really not that different from Nordic countries. Like, it drives me crazy when they pretend like, ooh, those Nordic countries. It's like, no, you should compare tax rates, because I guarantee you it's comparable to what they're paying in Finland, for example, right? Like Bernie Sanders had an interview on Face the Nation over the weekend, and the Nordic model came up, and Margaret Brennan was like, yeah, but Finland pays this much in taxes. And I'm like, that's really not that different. And they get a lot more in return for the taxes they do pay. We pay high percentages. Like, if you're not super wealthy and you don't get to take advantage of all these loopholes and deductions, you're paying relatively similar amounts percentage wise and getting almost nothing in return in the United States. So that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, like if I have to pay higher taxes, but also I have healthcare, and I don't have to worry about copays and deductibles and all that stuff, and also if you have kids, you have childcare, and also like all of these things. It's like, yes, that sounds like a pretty good deal. In fact, in some of these cases, like you'll also literally, like, I mean, even the Mercatus Institute, found that in the healthcare case, it would literally save money for the average, like, middle income taxpayer, because like they getting rid of premiums and copays and deductibles and all that stuff. Like, you'd be paying more for that than you would the tax increase to pay for Medicare for all. But I mean, again, it's just this coercion thing that's like, oh well, all this money that you have to fork over to this financial middleman so you can have healthcare, that's fine because it's not coercion, and it's not coercion because you're not legally required to. It's just that if you would like to continue to live, or get your medical bills paid for, you have to.
Well, I saw this amazing debate between Ben Shapiro and Anna Kasparian the other day, where she nailed it with you guys were talking about healthcare, and he brought up some point about, well, people are too fat here. That's the problem.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. I know. Yes, where
there
he's
you
just
go.
like, yeah.
Well, we actually have this clip. I don't know, Jake, if you've got it, or I could.
What's the number one policy you'd like to see the Democratic Party pursue? You're a legislator now. You've been elected president. What's your first initiative as president of the United States?
I mean, you couldn't do this unilaterally, but I think one of the main policies that would improve a lot of these other issues that we're talking about is healthcare, single payer healthcare, or at least, in the very least, in the short term, just reform healthcare to a point where everyone has the coverage they need to get the care they need. So the untreated mental illnesses that we're seeing on our streets right now, that is a byproduct of a broken healthcare system. I want to fix that. That would be, again, the number one thing I would focus on if I had the power to really make that change.
So, I mean, obviously, I think that we all see the problems with the healthcare system. It's sort of a weird Frankensteinian monster, this sort of private-public monster in which virtually all medical care in the United States is publicly subsidized at some level by Medicare, Medicaid, by hospital reimbursements that are involved with local and state regulation. The levels of regulatory thickets and the amount of administration, the administrative cost for healthcare in the United States is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. And I think that the big problem with healthcare is that everyone, it's such a thicket now that no matter which side you come at it from, you are going to get wrecked for even poking a stick into it. Right, the minute you poke a stick at it, ooze comes out. Because if you come at it from my side of the aisle, which is it needs more privatization, we should get rid of the connection between your employment. I mean, if I were coming at this tabula rasa, you get rid of the connection between your employment and your healthcare. It's absurd. Why is your employer paying for your healthcare in the first place? Right? You should.
Well, how would people? So look, I agree with you on that. I think a single payer system would do away with the need for employers to provide coverage for their employees. I actually hate the system where, if you're working at a place that you might despise and you want to move on, Or maybe you want to start your own business, right? You're less willing to do it if your healthcare is reliant on you staying at the company you hate so much.
Right.
I think it's actually stifled a lot of economic growth. I think there would be a lot more small businesses, successful small businesses, if people had that freedom to just walk away knowing that they wouldn't lose their health coverage as a result. You get what I'm
Right.
saying?
No, first of all, I totally agree with you. I think that's why I would prefer to go back to individual and community-based insurance. Right. This is why the lack of social fabric really is a problem, because in my vision of a perfect healthcare world, essentially, because you know your neighbors and you know your community, you don't want your neighbors to die, your community helps subsidize your healthcare. But I have very serious doubts about the national community subsidizing healthcare at a large scale, because I don't know that person in New York. I don't know what their habits are. I don't know what incentives they have to engage in the healthcare structure. And you do see a wide variety of sort of models that have been used, right? Singapore is a much more privatized healthcare system than, for example, Great Britain. So there are a bunch of different ways to sort of slice this particular issue.
Yeah. You know what's interesting, because we hear a lot of, I feel like the right wing in America puts words in the mouths of Canadians and people living in Great Britain when it comes to their health insurance policy, and their nationalized healthcare. But you talk to them and they seem to love it. So I'll give you an example. So when Boris Johnson was running again for prime minister, what was really interesting is how he kept emphasizing the need to bolster.
Oh, it's a third rail there. You can't touch it.
But it's a third rail because of how much the people living there love their healthcare system. And so there's freedom that comes along with that. When you consider the fact that our life expectancy in the United States is comparable to that of Cuba's, there's something broken in our system.
Well, so first of all, whenever we get into these sorts of discussions, you have to start looking at apples to apples comparisons in terms of the demographics of the United States, our age, the ethnic composition of the United States, because different ethnicities actually have different health problems disproportionately. You have to look at the poverty rate in different areas. Obviously, the life expectancy in Vermont is significantly higher than the life expectancy in, say, Alabama, and so that is a wide gap that is not really attributable necessarily to healthcare quality, because again, the same national system applies to both Vermont and Alabama. So you have to, the United States is also a country of 340 million people. Cuba is a country of significantly fewer people.
Right.
So all of these, this is why I sort of object to any attempt to use Norwegian models and apply them to a significantly more diverse, heterogeneous, and large country.
Well, okay, so let me get into that, because if you look at what's worked, because Cuba, obviously incredibly poor country, especially with embargoes and all of that. Donald Trump declared it a state sponsor of terror, which led to other countries feeling very uncomfortable doing any business with Cuba. So its healthcare system is severely under-resourced. But what they've done correctly is they've focused most of their energy on preventative care, because preventative care is less costly than just allowing people to get super sick. At that point, whatever illness they have is a lot more costly to deal with. So they're like, all right, we don't have the resources. We just got to make sure we really hone in on preventative care. That's worked out really well for them. Whereas in the United States, people aren't getting the preventative care they need to prevent severe illnesses because it's so costly, right? So we need to do something.
Well, first we should tell people to stop eating so much.
Yeah, that's a good approach. Hey, stop eating. I've never heard that one, every time I eat, cupcakes, I'm like, oh, this is encouraged. This is an encouraged thing.
Does he really? I remember conservatives freaking out about Michelle Obama, sort of encouraging kids to eat more vegetables, that this was horrible government overreach. I don't know if you guys
I know. It's great.
So it's like, I want to know what the Ben Shapiro plan for getting the government to tell everybody to stop eating so much looks like.
Also, look, to be fair, he didn't really elaborate on how this would be beneficial, because he would like to see more privatization in the healthcare industry. And he thinks that it would somehow improve our current predicament with how broken our healthcare system is. But okay, I'm going to give you an example of something. Okay, specific, it's anecdotal, but I'm sure many people have similar experiences. So I found out last year that I have psoriasis, which is a real bitch. Okay. And so I go to the doctor prescribes me a steroid cream that anytime I have some sort of flare up, put the steroid cream on, except I don't want to use steroid cream for the rest of my life. find out that there's like this new medication. It's an injection you get like every 3 months or something. And it clears everything. You don't have to use a steroid cream, which has all sorts of side effects that I'm uncomfortable with. But guess what? Private insurance will not pay for it. Private insurance forces you to go to a dermatologist and try a billion different like potential solutions, like a gluten-free diet or whatever, UV treatments, nonsense. Every nonsensical treatment you could think of, you have to exhaust all of that before insurance is like, oh, fine, we'll cover it. Okay. Another example, I was talking to a friend who has ADD. And he was telling me that right now there's like a nationwide shortage of Adderall, which I can't believe it's still going on. But he told me that it's a nationwide shortage specifically of generic Adderall. The brand name is available and it's plentiful. However, insurance won't cover it. So there are all these people in the country right now who are really, really struggling with untreated ADD because the insurance will not pay for the brand name version of that drug. So wait, hold on. How is privatizing the system further going to make it better? Because privatization means you introduce a profit motive in the system. Insurance companies are not looking to keep you healthy. They're looking to make money off of you. And so they're going to look for any excuse to avoid providing coverage for all sorts of treatments and medications that you need.
So
anyway,
and I really want to know, like, these extra privatizations that he wants, what are we talking about here? Because like, other than Medicare for seniors and Medicaid for very low income people and people on disabilities, like insurance is all private already. So it's like, so either we're talking about privatizing one of those things, which, man, I'd say it a little louder that's what you want to do, right? Or what we're talking about, like selling, like more hospitals that are owned by the county to like a bank, like it's that definitely sounds like it's going to give everybody better health care. But like, I love that in his response, right? I mean, like, you sort of started out, you had this like very straightforward, like, yeah, we should have Medicare for all. Here's all the good things that would do. That would, that would mean that people weren't afraid to, didn't stay in jobs that they hated because they couldn't give up their employer health insurance. I mean, you could add, like, I mean, there are people who stay in bad or even abusive marriages because they don't want to give up their spousal health insurance. So here's, and hey, look, Canadians seem to like it. British people seem to like it. Boris Johnson had to pretend, that he liked it, seems to have all this stuff going for it. And his response was one, okay, you have to have, it's like, oh, he agrees that employment should be linked to health insurance, but it's like, I think you started to ask this and then he kind of galloped off to some other stuff. Like what? So what's the plan? Like, does Ben Shapiro want to ban offering health insurance as like part of a package of benefits? Like,
I don't know. I don't know.
He went further. Like it was funny because he's like, yeah, I agree with that. I agree that there shouldn't even be employer. Like we should have worse than that. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy.
Well, it should only be your community because I don't know people.
I like that. I had to ask my neighbor for the code to the laundry room the other day, and I should have been like, hey, can you pay for my health care too? When I was there, that would have been awesome.
By the way, I feel the same way about my neighbors literally living in the same building as me as I do people living in Florida. Okay.
Yeah.
Like you're fellow Americans, you're people, and we live in the richest country in the world, and you shouldn't have to struggle for your health care. Also, please don't talk to me. Just like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have to love you, and I don't have to see you as part of like my family.
Yeah.
To want you to be good, to want you to be healthy and safe, and
I also don't know their. I mean, look, I don't know. I mean, especially, right now is a bad example given where I live currently, but I mean, like they have when I was, like last year when I lived in Atlanta, you know, like I have, yeah, it's like, look, I don't know most of my neighbors. I certainly don't know their kids, but you know, I'm still happy to pay taxes that pay for those kids to go to school. Cause like, I don't think it's like, well, I don't know those kids. Maybe they suck, you know, like I have I still think they deserve, I still think they deserve an education, and, you know, and I still, you know, and it shouldn't matter whether I think that or not, you know, I should still have to pay that. So that was weird. But the other thing, and by the way, all this stuff about social fabric, it's like, well, you can't have it both ways, man. They have, the reason why the social fabric is bad is because we live in a economically precarious, high crime, which is also downstream of, you know, of all the economic stuff, like stressed out.
But also, let's discuss the social fabric of America for a second, right? Because listen, I'm really not interested in hearing from perpetuators of the incessant manufactured culture wars talking about the social fabric of this country, because the whole point of the manufactured culture wars is to divide and conquer, right?
Absolutely.
For Americans to see other fellow Americans as the others, as the enemy. And I think it's gross. And I want to fight that, right? Because the more we feed into that, you know, us versus them narrative, the harder it is for workers, even in like a specific workplace, to see each other as, you know, like what I love about the discussions that like you and Michael would have all the time, Ben, is that you guys would focus on how those in the same class have far more in common with one another, as opposed to someone in the top 1% who might share some other identity point, whether it be their race or their gender or their sexual orientation, all of that stuff. And that's 100% true. And if Americans can just really understand that and internalize that, I think we'd be in a way better place.
Absolutely, which is, by the way, as good a time as any to shout this out. I was going to mention this at some point over the course of the episode. The Nation magazine just announced that they hired 3 new columnists, one of whom is Adolph Reed.
Oh, that's awesome!
Whoa,
his first column for the Nation. You know, you bring in Bhaskar Sankara to run your magazine, you know, good things start to happen. His first column for the Nation is just up today. It's called Race and Class: The Beginnings of an Argument. And he talks about kind of the origins of a certain kind of left intellectual identity politics in the 1970s. He's got this great line in here. However useful these notions must have seemed at the time, they didn't contribute much to our understanding of how racialist or gender ideologies and practices actually and concretely connect with capitalist black exploitation. Class exploitation, asserting, for example, that a black single mother downsized out of her steelworker job and facing eviction or foreclosure suffers from, quote, triple oppression, unquote, doesn't say anything about the sources of her circumstances or how she might understand them, much less what she might do to improve them. You know, which is just kind of, you know, Adolf at his, you know, like at his rhetorical best there, you know, making this point, you know, that it's like, I don't need, you know, like I was having this, you know, conversation, you know, last week with, or no, I was on Tuesday. We did the, so we did Jason Miles from This Is Revolution and I did this meet and greet at the Rainbow Bar and Grill in Los Angeles, and we had and there was a conversation we had there about people who like starting meetings with land acknowledgments, and it's like, this is such a weird, like, you know, like Native Americans are statistically the lowest income ethnic group in the United States.
Yep.
I've got to imagine you do a poll. It's like, what are your priorities here? You know, what are the things that you want? Right. It's like, how is like, you know, I don't know, more money or healthcare. No. Mostly I want white people to ritually express, like, you know, their historical guilt. Like that's the biggest thing that's going to help me.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. It really is. And it's a way to provide cover for the ongoing system that really almost like celebrates inequality, right? Celebrates what we're seeing with all this concentration of wealth and power at the very top. And I'm just, look, I don't know, guys. It's a delicate thing to balance because is there racism, sexism, homophobia, and all that? Of course there is, right? And I don't ever want to minimize that. But at the same time, I do think that the mainstream Democratic Party has an interest in hyper focusing on those issues and just offering platitudes and happy talk to avoid offering anything else.
Yeah.
And I'm just getting tired of it.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know. I guess my feeling is that I don't really, you go back to the 1990s, Bill Clinton would famously say that he felt people's pain, right? And I don't, yeah. Good question. I don't really I don't care very much actually about whether a politician feels my or anybody else's pain. I don't really care whether they'll they're going to validate anybody's experience. I don't even really care very much whether they morally disapprove of all those things that all those things that you just mentioned are bad, right? They're real and they're bad. But I don't know. I mean, I think what I'd like from government would be actually improving my or anybody else's life, right? I mean, I think I care more about that than I care about what they think about any of the rest of that stuff.
Also, I totally agree with you on that. And also, Richard Wolff makes this point often, and I think he's completely right. When people are struggling economically, when they're in desperate financial situations, and then they have the political elite point to various disenfranchised groups of people as the scapegoat, that's what creates the hatred in this country and the division in this country.
Totally.
During the same interview with Bernie Sanders on Face the Nation, I always mix up the names, Meet the Press, Face the Nation, same. Anyway, but on that show, apparently in his book, he writes that he does not believe that the majority of Trump voters are racists and bigots. Really? And so Margaret Brennan brought that up and she's like, you wrote this. Do you actually think that? And Bernie's like, yeah. And Bernie's like, look, are there some racists and bigots that voted for Trump? Yeah. But do I think that all of them are? No. And then he gave the example of Florida, which elected Obama twice. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, oh, really? What happened? The demographics in Florida shifted so much that they went from electing the country's first biracial president twice to now all of a sudden they're all racist and they elected Trump. No, could it be that Trump, it was hollow and he didn't actually mean it, but he at least offered or paid lip service to the economic anxieties that people are facing, whereas every other politician, both on the Democrat side and the Republican side, just pretended like it doesn't exist, that everything's great. Obama was doing tours to brag about how much he improved the economy. I mean, it was absurd.
Yeah, well, in fact, in Florida, in the most recent presidential election, Trump won, but the $15 minimum wage ballot should have won by more than Trump did, which suggests that, if you actually wanted to appeal to people who voted for him, that just mathematically, that strongly suggests that there's at least some of those people who could be peeled off, by actually doing things like that. But yeah, it's amazing. I remember being really struck by this in the fall 2021 when the McAuliffe-Youngkin election happened in Virginia. And it really seemed like for a lot of kind of left, online lefty kinds of spaces, the only acceptable explanation for that election was that everybody in Virginia was horrifically racist. And it's okay, but if that's your explanation for why people vote, that's your only explanation for why people vote for Republicans, then Biden won Virginia the year before. I mean, was there a huge racism increase between 2020 and 2021? Right? Or could it be that McAuliffe just had a horrible campaign? That's it's so bizarre that this is the only acceptable explanation for any of this stuff. And yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's not that, lest nobody get it twisted. It's not that racism doesn't exist or isn't awful, right? It does and it is. But it's just the sort of the hyper focus on validating people, in identity politics terms, the hyper focus on what's going on in people's heads, and and morally disapproving of the the voters, which is like it's like I always think of the who's the it's Bertolt Brecht after the uprising in East Berlin in 1953. He wrote this poem where he was talking about the party went around plastering posters saying that because of the uprising and the general strike, people would have to work twice as hard to earn back their trust. And he says, well, wouldn't it be simpler if the government simply dissolved the people and elected another? And it's like kind of the same point, because it's like, okay, but hold on. It's like, if your explanation for why you lose elections is that the voters suck, like something has really gotten backwards here.
100%. And look, I think back at 2016, and I definitely cringe at a lot of the stuff I said. And it was because I existed in this bubble that was void of any real material or class analysis. You know what I'm saying? And once you're stuck in that news cycle, you just start seeing other Americans who might disagree with you politically as like your mortal enemy. And it's by design. That happens by design. And that's why, just like a broad statement or general statement about my conversation. Look, I went on Ben's show, right? He was very nice to ask me to come on his show, but I was like, number one, I'm not getting paid for this. Okay. Yeah. Number two, I'm literally traveling across the country to do this. So like, how can I maximize this opportunity for the left, right? Yep. And the way to maximize it is to not to be insanely judgmental and combative toward his audience, but to really show his audience what we stand for, right? Who we really are and what we really want, what we see for the country. And I don't know, I think, I gotta say, the people from his audience who reached out to me afterward were incredibly receptive, incredibly kind. It was really shocking. And I'm really happy to see it.
The comments were all really, really positive.
Very positive. Yeah. And I was happy to see it.
Totally. Right. And I think that getting people to like, I mean, just crassly, I absolutely want people to hate their neighbors and coworkers who vote differently less and the bosses more, right? I mean, that's I mean, it really is as simple as that. I mean, if you read in like Current Affairs magazine did an interview with Justine Medina, I think, who was one of the organizers at the Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, and she mentioned that like one of the people who like obviously the head of the union, Chris Smalls, is, radical leftist black man, but like one of the organizers who actually signed up the most people in that campaign was this guy who was his nicknamed Uncle Pat, who's this Italian-American Trump voter who just I probably wanted more time to be able to go to the bathroom and back, that like you get as an Amazon warehouse worker. And also I think was like outraged when he saw what they were doing to try to clamp down on the union. And it's like, I don't want like, I mean, yes, Trump is my enemy. Like Uncle Pat is not.
Right.
That's a pretty straightforward distinction. I do want to talk more about your conversation with that other Ben in a minute, but if we're going to do even a 20 or 30 minute post game for patrons, we do need to switch over to that. Arun, are you be able to stick around for a few minutes? Or
I'll stay for a couple minutes for sure.
All right, outstanding. So we're going to go to the post game with both Anna and Arun, and if you are a patron, you should have had the link to that about half an hour ago. If you are not, that is patreon.com/Ben Burgis. $5 a month, you get access to every patron exclusive post game, Discord server. Sometimes you get early access to things. Mostly you get our love and gratitude for helping to keep this thing going. Because unlike right wing media, we don't have, We don't
$50 million.
Exactly. So
the Crowder deal. You don't have the
Yeah.
Crowder deal.
Yes, nobody's offered me that slave contract. But in any case, see people in the post game in just a minute. Left is best.